was invisible, a slave in a world that treated her like furniture, like air, like nothing. But while they ignored her, she was watching, learning, seeing every weakness, every mistake, every crack in the foundation of power. And when the new Jarl began leading his people toward destruction, she made a choice that would change everything. She would save them all, but they could never know it was her. Through whispers and shadows, through another woman's voice, she began to guide an entire settlement away from catastrophe. Every decision that saved lives, every alliance that prevented war, every strategy that ensured survival, all of it flowed from the mind of a girl who owned nothing, not even her own freedom. She became the invisible architect of their fate, weaving influence from absolute powerlessness. But power this profound can't stay hidden forever. And when the truth finally surfaced, when her careful web of deception unraveled in a single devastating moment, she would have to answer an impossible question. Was wisdom worth dying for? Because standing before an enraged Jarl who'd just discovered he'd been outsmarted by his own slave, with warriors calling for her execution and blood already spilled, she realized something terrifying. Being seen might be far more dangerous than staying invisible ever was. The bucket slipped from Astrid's hands, water spreading across the longhouse floor like spilled blood. Her breath caught, not because of the mess, because of what she'd just heard through the wooden partition separating the kitchen from the great hall. "We accept Jarl Sven's terms," Halvard's voice rang out with false confidence. "The northern fishing grounds are his. We'll take the inland routes instead." Astrid's heart hammered against her ribs. No, not those terms. Jarl Sven was testing them, pushing boundaries, seeing how far weakness would bend. Give him the fishing grounds and he'd take the coast within a season. Take the coast and the entire settlement would starve before winter's end. She pressed her palm against the rough timber wall, splinters biting into her skin. 8 winters had passed since they'd dragged her here, since they'd killed her father for debts he couldn't pay, since her mother had thrown herself into the fjord rather than watch her daughter sold. 8 winters of invisible servitude, 8 winters of watching, listening, learning every negotiation, every alliance, every crack in the foundation of power. And now, the Jarl's idiot son was handing their future to wolves. "Astrid!" Old Gudrun's hiss cut through her thoughts. "You're flooding the kitchen, girl. What's gotten into you?" Astrid bent to retrieve the bucket, her hands trembling. The cold water soaked through her wool dress, clinging to her legs. She could feel Gudrun's suspicious gaze on her back. "Nothing, mistress," Astrid whispered, using the title that tasted like ash in her mouth. She wasn't a mistress. She was property. Property didn't speak unless spoken to. Property didn't have opinions on trade negotiations. Property certainly didn't notice when the heir to a jarldom was about to destroy everything his father had built. Through the partition, she heard the scraping of benches. The meeting was ending. Halvard's warriors murmured approval, their voices thick with mead and ignorance. None of them understood. None of them saw what she saw. Jarl Gunnar had been a hard man, brutal even, but strategic. He'd built alliances like a Skaldwo verses, carefully, deliberately, each word placed to support the next. His son Halvard possessed all his father's cruelty with none of his wisdom. 6 months since the old Jarl's death, and already the careful structure was crumbling. Astrid wrung out her dress, watching brown water drip between the floorboards. She'd been 12 when they'd brought her here, small enough that the raiders hadn't bothered with her beyond marking her as saleable. They'd killed her father quickly at least. An axe to the skull, no suffering. Her mother. Astrid pushed that memory down, deep where it couldn't surface during daylight. "Go serve them," Gudrun ordered, shoving a pitcher of mead into Astrid's hands. "And keep your eyes down. Halvard's in a mood." Halvard was always in a mood. Astrid pushed through the leather curtain separating kitchen from hall. Smoke from the central fire stung her eyes, mixing with the smell of roasted pork and unwashed men. The warriors sprawled across, benches like satisfied wolves, already celebrating a negotiation that would kill them all. She moved between them, refilling cups, a ghost in human form. This was her power, being invisible. Thralls occupied the space between furniture and air, noticed only when they failed their duties. She'd learned to weaponize that invisibility, to listen without seeming to hear, to observe without appearing to see. "My father would have approved," Halvard announced, his voice carrying the particular arrogance of men who'd inherited everything and earned nothing. He sat in the high seat, his father's seat, his bulk dwarfing the carved wood. "Jarl Sven respects strength. We showed him we're reasonable men." Reasonable. The word made Astrid's jaw clench. They'd shown weakness. Jarl Sven would return within a moon, demanding more. Then more again, until there was nothing left but bones picked clean. She poured mead into Bjorn's cup. The Skald watched her with those unsettling pale eyes, the kind that seemed to see more than they should. He was dangerous, this one. Too observant, too clever. She'd noticed him studying people the way she did, cataloging gestures, reading the space between words. "Lady Sigrid seems troubled," Bjorn said quietly, addressing Halvard, but somehow the words felt aimed at Astrid. "Perhaps she questions the wisdom of ceding territory to Jarl Sven." "My wife questions everything," Halvard laughed, but the sound held an edge. "She has a woman's mind, soft and fearful. She'll see reason once the inland routes prove profitable." They wouldn't. Astrid knew the numbers even if Halvard didn't. The inland routes required twice the men, 3 times the time, and passed through territories controlled by jarls who'd never negotiated terms with Gunnar. It was suicide, dressed as strategy. She moved toward the high table where Sigrid sat, isolated among the celebrating men. The jarl's wife was young, barely 20, married to Gunnar when she was 14, and widowed at 19. She picked at her food, her face carefully blank in that way women learned when surrounded by men who mistook silence for agreement. Astrid leaned close to refill Sigrid's cup, her voice barely a breath. "The fish will rot in Sven's boats before he can salt them all. He doesn't have enough thralls to process what he's taken. He'll need to trade them back within a season." Sigrid's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes flicked to Astrid's face, widening slightly. For a heartbeat, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. Then Sigrid's expression smoothed, and she turned away as if Astrid had said nothing at all. But Astrid had seen it. The small nod, the tiny relaxation in Sigrid's shoulders. She'd planted the seed. Now she'd have to wait, invisible and patient, to see if it would grow. Or if they'd all starve before spring. 3 days passed before Sigrid summoned her. Astrid was scrubbing the stone floor of the storage room when Gudrun appeared in the doorway, her expression sour as spoiled milk. "Lady Sigrid wants you in her chambers. Now." The brush slipped from Astrid's fingers, clattering against stone. Her stomach twisted. Had she miscalculated? Had Sigrid told Halvard about the whispered comment? Thralls who spoke out of turn lost tongues. Or worse. She rose slowly, wiping her wet hands on her dress. The fabric was rough against her palms, worn thin from years of washing. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Gudrun grabbed her arm, fingers digging in. "Whatever you've done, girl, you'll hang for it. I warned you about keeping your place." Astrid said nothing. Speech would only make things worse. She climbed the wooden stairs to the upper level where the family chambers sat, each step creaking under her weight. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Through the narrow windows, she could see the fjord stretching dark and cold toward the horizon. Her mother had walked into water like that. Had it been cold? Had she hesitated at the edge? Sigrid's door stood slightly ajar. Astrid knocked, her knuckles barely making sound against the wood. "Enter." The chamber was small but well appointed. Furs covered the sleeping platform. Woven tapestries depicted hunting scenes, boars and wolves frozen in eternal chase. A single oil lamp burned on a table, casting shadows that danced across Sigrid's face. The Jarl's wife sat on a wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap. She was beautiful in that fragile northern way, pale skin and blonde hair braided with silver thread. but her eyes held something harder than beauty, something calculating. "Close the door," Sigrid said quietly. Astrid obeyed, her pulse hammering. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor rushes, counting the dried herbs scattered among them. Thyme, sage, lavender to mask the smell of damp wood and bodies. "Look at me." Astrid's head lifted slowly. Meeting a free person's eyes was dangerous for thralls. It suggested equality that didn't exist, but disobedience was worse. Sigrid studied her with an intensity that made Astrid's skin prickle. "What you said about Jarl Sven and the fish, how did you know?" The question hung between them like a blade. Truth or lies? Both could kill her. "I listen, my lady," Astrid said carefully, keeping her voice soft, subservient. "The traders who come through the kitchen, they talk. They say Jarl Sven's thralls are old, weak, not enough. Hands to process a full catch. Last season he lost half his stock to rot. And the inland routes Halvard wants to use?" Astrid's breath caught. This was the edge of the cliff. One more step and she'd either fly or fall. "They passed through Jarl Magnus's territory," she said slowly. "He and Gunnar had disagreements, old ones, about a woman, I think. He'll demand payment for passage, high payment, more than the roots are worth." Sigrid's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened in her lap. "How do you know these things? You're a kitchen thrall." "Kitchen thralls hear everything, my lady. We're invisible. Men speak freely around us, as if we're furniture." The words tasted bitter but true. "I've been here 8 years. I've listened to every negotiation, every alliance. Your husband, the old Jarl, he taught me without knowing. Every decision he made, I heard the reasons, the strategy. And his son has none of his father's wisdom." The words escaped before Astrid could stop them. She froze, terror flooding through her veins like ice water. She'd just insulted the heir to a jarldom, to his widow. Death would be quick if she was lucky. But Sigrid's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, he doesn't." The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and electric. Sigrid rose, moving to the window. She stood there in silence, watching the fjord. "Halvard ignores me. He thinks I'm decorative, useful only for producing heirs. But Gunnar told, me things before he died. Warned me. Said his son would destroy everything unless someone guided him." She turned back to Astrid, and in her eyes was something fierce and desperate. "I tried. I suggested we reconsider Sven's terms. Halvard laughed at me. Said I should focus on weaving and let men handle strategy." Astrid remained silent, sensing the shape of what was coming but afraid to name it. "You understand these things," Sigrid continued, her voice dropping lower. "You see what I see." "What?" "If..." She paused, seeming to weigh each word carefully. "What if you helped me? Quietly. You could tell me what to listen for, what questions to ask. I could influence Halvard through gentler means, pillow talk, wifely concern. He might listen if he thinks the ideas are his own." The proposal was madness. It was treason. It was opportunity wrapped in catastrophe. "My lady, if anyone discovered, no one will discover anything. You'll remain invisible, as you've always been. I'll be the voice. You'll be the mind." Sigrid's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a small leather pouch on the table. She opened it, revealing 3 silver coins. "A fortune for a thrall. This is yours, and there will be more. Food, better clothes, protection from Gudrun's temper." Astrid stared at the coins. They represented safety, comfort, things she hadn't known in 8 years. But they also represented a noose tightening slowly around her neck. Why? The question escaped before wisdom could stop it. "Why trust me?" Sigrid's expression softened, becoming almost sad. "Because you're smart enough to keep us both alive. Because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And because..." She hesitated. "Because I'm drowning here, and you're the only one who sees it." The honesty in those words hit Astrid harder than any blow. Here was the Jarl's wife, draped in silver and authority, admitting she was as trapped as any thrall. Different cage, same bars. Astrid reached for the coins, her fingers closing around cold metal. "What do you need to know?" "Everything," Sigrid breathed. "Teach me everything." Outside, a raven called, harsh and sharp. Somewhere in the longhouse below, Halvard's laughter echoed, loud and oblivious, and Astrid felt the first thread of her invisible web begin to form, delicate and deadly as spider silk. The alliance with Jarl Torsten should have been simple. Astrid knelt beside Sigrid's chair in the private chamber, pretending to mend a torn hem while her mind raced through possibilities. Outside, early autumn rain hammered against the longhouse roof, each drop like a tiny fist demanding entry. "Torsten wants access to our harbor," Sigrid said quietly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "For his trading ships. Halvard thinks it's a fair exchange for military support." Astrid's needle paused mid-stitch. "What does Halvard offer in return?" 20 warriors, to be called upon if Torsten needs them." The needle slipped, pricking Astrid's thumb. Blood welled up, dark and bright. She pressed it against the fabric, watching the red stain spread. 20 warriors was half their fighting force. Halvard was offering their throat to be cut. "Torsten is in debt to 3 different jarls," Astrid said slowly, choosing each word like stepping stones across a frozen river. "I heard his merchant talking in the kitchen last moon. He owes tribute he can't pay. If he calls those 20 warriors, it won't be for defense. It'll be for a raid he's planning. A desperate one." Sigrid's face paled. "Halvard agreed to this yesterday. The contract will be sealed at the Thing in 5 days. 5 days. Not enough time to stop it through normal channels. Not enough time for anything except improvisation and prayer to gods." Astrid wasn't sure listened to thralls. "Tell Halvard you had a dream," Astrid whispered, her mind already weaving the lie. Norse women's dreams carry weight, especially from a Jarl's wife. "Say you saw our warriors drowning in foreign waters, their bodies floating beneath strange stars. Say the gods showed you Torsten's ship sinking with our men aboard. He'll think I'm hysterical. Then be hysterical. Cry if you must. Beg him to consult the vulva before signing anything. The wise woman will see what we need her to see if we explain it properly." Astrid met Sigrid's eyes, her voice dropping even lower. "Your terror must be real enough that Halvard fears ignoring it. Make him believe the gods themselves are warning him." Sigrid nodded slowly, but her hands trembled in her lap. "And if the vulva refuses to help us?" "She won't. She knew Gunnar was dying before anyone else. She sees patterns like I do. Show her respect, bring her silver, tell her what you've learned about Torsten's debts. She'll understand." The next 2 days passed in agonizing slowness. Astrid watched from shadows as Sigrid performed her role perfectly. She wept at dinner, describing nightmares in vivid detail. She clutched Halvard's arm, begging him to wait, to seek guidance. And Halvard, uncomfortable with his wife's raw emotion, finally agreed to consult the vulva. Astrid accompanied Sigrid to the wise woman's dwelling at the forest edge, carrying offerings of bread and dried fish. The old woman lived alone in a turf house that smelled of smoke and herbs, her white hair hanging loose around a face carved by decades of northern winters. "You come seeking my sight," the vulva said before they'd even spoken. Her clouded eyes, fixed on Sigrid, then shifted to Astrid with unnerving precision. But the slave sees more clearly than the lady. Astrid's blood turned cold. She kept her gaze down, her posture subservient, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Sigrid placed the silver on the table between them, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "I've had troubling dreams about Jarl Torsten's proposal. My husband plans to pledge warriors to his cause." The vulva was silent for a long moment, her gnarled fingers tracing patterns in spilled salt on the wooden surface. "Torsten walks a path toward darkness. His debts will drag others down with him." She looked directly at Astrid now, and something passed between them. Understanding. Conspiracy. The gods warn against this alliance. Tell your husband the runes speak of betrayal and drowning. Relief flooded through Astrid so strongly she nearly swayed. The vulva had seen, had understood, had chosen to help. Thank you, wise mother, Sigrid breathed. But as they turned to leave, the vulva's voice stopped them. Lady Sigrid, a word of caution. Power shared is power doubled, but power hidden is power that will eventually demand revelation. Consider carefully which path you walk. The warning followed Astrid back to the longhouse, wrapping around her thoughts like cold fog. She knew what the vulva meant. This arrangement with Sigrid was temporary. Eventually someone would notice. Eventually questions would be asked. That evening Halvard called a gathering in the great hall. Warriors and freemen assembled, mead flowing freely. Astrid served, invisible as always, but her ears caught every word. The vulva has spoken, Halvard announced, his voice carrying across the smoke-filled space. She warns against alliance with Jarl Torsten. My wife's dreams were true visions. We will decline his offer. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Men nodded, respecting the gods' wisdom. None of them knew the gods had nothing to do with it. None of them saw the slave girl who'd orchestrated their salvation, except Bjorn. The Skald sat apart from the others, his pale eyes tracking Astrid as she moved between tables. She felt his gaze like fingers on her spine, pressing, probing. When she passed close to refill his cup, he spoke quietly. His words meant only for her. Interesting timing. Lady Sigrid never mentioned dreams before. Now suddenly she's a prophet, and her warnings perfectly align with information that a careful observer might gather from kitchen gossip and trader talk. Astrid's hand remained steady as she poured, though her insides churned. I wouldn't know anything about that, Skald. I'm just a thrall. Are you? His smile was slight, knowing. I wonder. She moved away quickly, her pulse racing. Bjorn suspected. Maybe didn't know for certain yet, but suspected. And suspicion from a man that observant was as dangerous as accusation. Later, in Sigrid's chamber, Astrid reported the conversation. The Skald is watching us. Bjorn. Sigrid's face tightened with concern. He's loyal to Halvard. If he speaks to him, he won't. Not yet. He's curious, not convinced. But we need to be more careful. Space out the suggestions. Make some of them wrong occasionally so you seem human, fallible. Astrid paced the small room, her mind working through scenarios. And we need to give him something else to focus on. A mystery that has nothing to do with us. Like what? Astrid paused at the window watching. Shadows move in the yard below. There are rumors about the grain stores. Someone's been taking small amounts. Nothing obvious, but enough that the stores won't last winter if it continues. Let Bjorn investigate that. Give his clever mind something to chase that isn't us. Sigrid nodded slowly. You think of everything. I have to, Astrid said quietly, because the moment I don't, we both die. Outside, the rain continued falling, washing the world clean of footprints and evidence, leaving only the careful architecture of lies they were building, one whispered word at a time. Winter came early that year, brutal and unforgiving. Astrid stood in the kitchen before dawn, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Through the narrow window, she watched ice creep across the fjord like crystallized death. The settlement had 3 moons of supplies left, maybe 4 if they rationed carefully. But Halvard had just agreed to host a feast for visiting Jarls, a display of wealth and power that would consume a quarter of their stores in a single night. She'd tried to warn Sigrid, had explained the numbers, the danger, the foolishness of excess when starvation loomed. But some currents were too strong to redirect. You look troubled, girl. Astrid spun around. Bjorn stood in the doorway, wrapped in furs, his pale eyes catching the lamplight. How long had he been watching? Just cold, Skald, she said, turning back to the fire where porridge bubbled in an iron pot. Winter's hard on everyone. Yes, though some suffer more than others. He moved closer, warming his hands over the flames. I've been investigating the grain thefts. Strange thing. The amounts taken match almost exactly what would be needed to supplement the thrall's rations. Someone's been feeding slaves extra portions. Astrid's stomach clenched. She had been taking that grain, carefully, sparingly, because she'd seen how thin the other thralls had become. Because watching people starve when she could prevent, it was a torture she couldn't bear. Perhaps they were hungry, she said quietly. Perhaps. Bjorn studied her face. Or perhaps someone with unusual compassion decided to play redistribution without permission. Someone who thinks about numbers and consequences. Someone who sees things others miss. The accusation hung between them, delicate and deadly. Astrid met his gaze, weighing her options. Denial would insult his intelligence. Admission would confirm his suspicions. If such a person existed, she said carefully, they would know that starved thralls work slowly, die easily, cost more to replace than to feed. It would be practical thinking, not compassion. Practical. Bjorn's smile was slight, knowing. Like suggesting Lady Sigrid consult the Velva about Jarl Torsten's alliance, like the dreams that saved us from a disastrous contract. Ice flooded Astrid's veins. He knew, not suspected, knew. I don't understand what you're suggesting, Skald. Don't you? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I've watched you for months now. The way you position yourself to overhear conversations, how you linger near important discussions. I've seen you whisper to Lady Sigrid, seen her suddenly make suggestions that sound suspiciously like tactics Jarl Gunnar would have used. He paused. You're clever, dangerously so, but you've made one critical mistake. Astrid's heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. What mistake? You've been too successful. 3 times now, Sigrid has steered Halvard away from catastrophe. 3 perfect interventions. It's statistically improbable. And I don't believe in coincidence. The porridge started to burn. Astrid could smell it, acrid and bitter, but she couldn't move, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. Are you going to tell Halvard? Her voice came out steady despite the terror coursing through her. Bjorn was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That depends. On what? On whether you're saving this settlement or manipulating it for personal gain. The question struck her like a physical blow. Personal gain? I'm a thrall. I own nothing. I am nothing. What possible gain could I seek? Influence, power, freedom, eventually. Bjorn's eyes bore into hers. Or perhaps revenge. You were brought here by force. Your family destroyed. Maybe this is elaborate sabotage disguised as help. Rage bloomed in Astrid's chest, hot and furious. You think I want this? Settlement to fail. These people, cruel as they've been, are all that stands between me and being sold to someone worse. Halvard is an idiot, yes. He's leading everyone towards starvation and war. But Sigrid is trying to save them. I'm helping her do that. Why? The single word cut through her anger. Why risk your life to save people who'd kill you without hesitation if they knew what you were doing? The question exposed something raw inside her. Why was she doing this? For Sigrid's silver? For the small comforts? Or for something deeper? Something she barely dared acknowledge? Because I can't watch them die, she whispered. Because knowing I could prevent disaster and choosing not to would make me as monstrous as Halvard. Because, she swallowed hard, because my father taught me that wisdom unused is wisdom wasted, and I have so much of it, all locked inside me, useless unless I can find a way to speak it. Bjorn studied her for what felt like an eternity. Outside, the settlement was waking. Soon the kitchen would fill with other thralls, and this dangerous conversation would have to end. Here's what will happen, Bjorn said finally. I'll say nothing to Halvard. I'll continue my investigation into the grain thefts and conveniently conclude it was rats. Large, clever rats. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. But you need to be more careful. Sigrid's sudden wisdom is attracting attention. Others are starting to notice. You need to make her fail. Occasionally. Small failures. Nothing catastrophic. But enough to seem human and fallible. Relief and suspicion warred in Astrid's chest. Why are you helping us? Because Halvard is driving this settlement toward destruction, and I'd rather not starve or die in a pointless war. He moved toward the door, then paused. And because I knew your father. The world tilted. What? Eric the Steady. That's what we called him. He was a fair man, honest in his dealings. I traded with him several times before the end. Bjorn's expression softened slightly. He didn't deserve what happened. Neither did you. But you've survived, and you've turned suffering into something useful. That takes a particular kind of strength. Tears burned behind Astrid's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. If you knew him, then you know he'd want me to do the right thing, even if it's dangerous. I do know. That's why I'm protecting you. But Astrid, he used her name for the first time, and the intimacy of it was startling. Protection only goes so far. Eventually, this arrangement will collapse. Secrets this big always come to light. When that happens, make sure you have an escape planned. He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading into the growing noise of morning. Astrid turned back to the ruined porridge, her hands shaking as she scraped the burned mess from the pot. An ally. She had an unexpected ally. But Bjorn's warning echoed in her mind, mixing with the Velva's words from weeks before. Power hidden is power that will eventually demand revelation. How long could she remain invisible? How long before the weight of her own success crushed her? Outside, a horn sounded. The visiting Jarls were arriving for Halvard's wasteful feast. Astrid closed her eyes, calculating how many people would go hungry next month because of tonight's excess. Then she went to find Sigrid, because there was still time to minimize the damage, still time to whisper suggestions that might save lives, still time before the whole careful structure came crashing down around them. The feast hall glittered with false prosperity. Astrid moved between tables laden with roasted boar, honeyed bread, and enough mead to drown reason itself. 4 visiting Jarls sat in positions of honor, their warriors filling the benches, all of them judging Halvard's wealth and power by the excess before them. All of them blind to the starvation being purchased with this single night of abundance. She refilled cups, collected empty platters, and listened. Always listening. Jarl Orm leaned toward Halvard, his voice carrying over the noise. Your father's death left a vacuum. Others circle, wondering if you can fill it. This feast shows strength, but strength is more than full bellies and flowing mead. I've secured our borders, Halvard said, his words slightly slurred. He'd been drinking since midday. Made alliances, protected our interests. Have you? Jarl Orm's smile didn't reach his eyes. I heard you decline Torsten's proposal. Some say that showed wisdom, others say it showed fear. Astrid's fingers tightened on the pitcher she carried. The conversation was turning dangerous. She caught Sigrid's eye across the hall. The Jarl's wife sat rigid in her seat, her face carefully neutral, but Astrid could read the tension in her shoulders. My wife had visions, Halvard said defensively. The Volva confirmed them. The gods themselves warned against that. Alliance. Ah, yes. Your wife's convenient dreams. Jarl Orm took a long drink. Tell me, does Lady Sigrid often receive divine guidance, or only when it contradicts your initial decisions? The hall grew quieter. Other Jarls were listening now, interest sharpening their gazes. Astrid felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment Bjorn had warned about. Someone was finally asking the right questions. Halvard's face reddened. Are you suggesting my wife lies? I'm suggesting someone is guiding her. Someone with knowledge of politics and trade that a young woman typically wouldn't possess. Orm's eyes swept the hall, landing briefly on Astrid before moving on. Unless she's remarkably educated for a wife who was married at 14 and widowed at 19. Sigrid stood slowly, her movement drawing all attention. When she spoke, her voice was clear and cold. My husband taught me many things before he died. Jarl Gunnar believed a wife should understand the settlement she might someday need to protect. Perhaps your wife lacks such education, Jarl Orm. Perhaps that's why the concept seems so strange to you. The insult landed perfectly. Several warriors chuckled. Orm's face darkened, but he couldn't respond without admitting his own wife's inadequacy. Astrid wanted to cheer, wanted to applaud Sigrid's quick thinking. But relief died quickly as she noticed Bjorn watching from the corner, his expression troubled. And beside him, one of Orm's men, a thin warrior with calculating eyes, was staring directly at Astrid. The feast continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Suspicion had been planted, and no amount of mead could wash it away. Later, as Astrid cleared tables in the emptying hall, the thin warrior approached. He moved silently for someone his size, appearing beside her like a ghost. "You're the one," he said quietly. "The slave who whispers to the lady." Astrid's blood turned to ice. She kept her hands steady, kept stacking plates. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" He leaned closer and she could smell old sweat and leather. "I've been watching you all evening. The way Lady Sigrid glances at you. The way you position yourself to overhear important conversations. I served Jarl Gunnar for 2 years before his death. I remember you. You were always lurking, always listening. Thralls work everywhere. We hear things." Her voice remained steady despite her hammering heart. "But most thralls don't understand what they hear. You do. I can see it in your eyes." He grabbed her wrist, his grip painful. "What's your game? Are you selling information? Sabotaging the new Jarl? What does Lady Sigrid pay you?" Astrid met his gaze, forcing herself not to flinch. "She pays me nothing because there's nothing to pay for. I'm a kitchen thrall. I serve food and clean dishes. Whatever conspiracy you've imagined exists only in your head." "Liar." His grip tightened. "I'm going to watch you, every moment. And when I have proof, I'm bringing it to Jarl Orm. He'll reward me well for exposing the manipulation of a fellow Jarl." He released her wrist and walked away, leaving Astrid trembling. She looked down at her arm where his fingers had pressed. Bruises were already forming, dark purple against pale skin. "You need to leave." Astrid spun. Bjorn stood behind her, his face grave. "That was Leif the Weasel. He's Orm's spy, his snake. If he's decided you're his target, he won't stop until he has evidence. I can be more careful." "Careful won't be." "Enough. Not anymore." Bjorn glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Orm suspects Halvard is being manipulated. He's been circling this idea for weeks. Now his spy has focused on you. Even if you stop everything now, disappear completely into kitchen work, Leif will watch Sigrid. He'll wait for her next suggestion, trace it back, build his case." Panic clawed at Astrid's throat. "What do I do?" "Run. Tonight, if possible. I can get you passage on a ship leaving at dawn. There's a settlement in Iceland that needs workers. You could disappear there, start new, and leave Sigrid alone. Leave this place to Halvard's incompetence." The words burst out before Astrid could stop them. "Everyone here will starve or die in a pointless war within a year. Better than you dying tomorrow when Leif proves his suspicions." Bjorn's voice was urgent now. "You've done what you could. You've saved them multiple times, but your luck has run out." Astrid looked around the hall at the tapestries Sigrid had woven, at the high seat where Halvard sat drunk and oblivious, at the doors leading to the kitchen where other thralls labored invisibly. 8 years she'd survived here. 8 years of careful observation, of learning, of slowly building influence from absolute powerlessness. And now it was ending. Not with triumph, not with recognition. With flight in the darkness, another life abandoned, another identity erased. "I need to tell Sigrid." "No." Bjorn cut her off. "The less she knows, the safer she is. If Leif questions her, her ignorance will protect her. She can claim you deceived her, used her. She'll survive this." "Will she?" Astrid felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Without guidance, without someone to see what she can't, she'll have to." Bjorn pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch heavy with coins. "Enough for passage and supplies. Go to the docks before dawn. Ask for Captain Rolf. Tell him I sent you. He owes me a debt." Astrid stared at the pouch, feeling the weight of survival and defeat mingling in her palm. Freedom was right there, safety, a chance to live beyond these walls. But at what cost? She looked up at Bjorn, at his weathered face and knowing eyes. If I run, Halvard will destroy everything his father built. Everyone here will suffer. Yes. The single word held a universe of sorrow. But you'll live. And sometimes living is enough. Outside, wind howled through the settlement, carrying the smell of snow and ending things. Astrid clutched the pouch, feeling its promise and its price. She had until dawn to decide if invisible influence was worth dying for, or if freedom in nameless exile was the better wisdom after all. Astrid didn't go to the docks. She sat in the cold storage room as false dawn grayed the sky, Bjorn's pouch of coins heavy in her lap, and made a different choice. Not wisdom, not survival. Something far more dangerous. She was going to fight back. If Leif wanted evidence, she'd give him evidence. False evidence. A trail leading nowhere, implicating no one, leaving him chasing shadows while the real work continued in deeper hiding. The risk was insane. But the alternative was watching everything she'd built crumble. Watching Sigrid drown. Watching the settlement slide into ruin because one man's greed couldn't tolerate a woman's intelligence. She found Sigrid in the early morning, before the household woke. The Jarl's wife was braiding her hair, her movements mechanical, her face drawn, with sleepless worry. "You're still here," Sigrid breathed when Astrid slipped through the door. "Bjorn said you'd leave, said it was too dangerous." "It is dangerous, but running won't save you, only me." Astrid moved close, her voice urgent and low. "Leif is watching us. He knows something is happening, but he doesn't know what. We're going to show him something false. I don't understand. There's a thrall in the stables. Kari. She's about my age. Dark hair like mine. She's been here 4 years. Works with the horses. Keeps to herself." Astrid spoke quickly, the plan forming even as she explained it. "Starting today, you're going to speak with her occasionally, publicly. Ask her about the horses, about weather signs animals show, loud enough that others hear. But Kari doesn't know anything about." "Exactly. That's the point. In 3 days, you'll make a suggestion to Halvard, a bad one. Suggest he should increase tribute demands on the southern farmers before spring. It'll anger them, cause resentment, but it won't destroy anything immediately. Halvard might even do it because it sounds profitable." Sigrid's eyes widened. "You want me to fail deliberately?" "I want Leif to think he's found his culprit. He'll see you talking to Kari. He'll hear you make a poor decision. He'll connect them and believe this simple, stable thrall is feeding you bad advice. Meanwhile, you and I will stop meeting completely. No more private conversations. No more whispered suggestions." "Then how?" "Through Bjorn." Astrid pressed a folded cloth into Sigrid's hands. "Starting tonight, leave your embroidery in the hall when you retire. If you need guidance, tie a knot in the corner of whatever you're working on. Bjorn will notice. He'll come to me, I'll tell him what to suggest, and he'll find a way to mention it to you publicly, as if it's his own observation. Leif will never connect you to me because we'll never interact." Sigrid stared at the cloth, then at Astrid. "This could work. But what happens to Kari when Leif accuses her?" The question pierced Astrid's chest like a blade. She'd thought of this, had spent the dark hours wrestling with it. Kari will be questioned, maybe punished, but she's genuinely innocent and that innocence will show. There's no evidence against her because there's nothing to find. Eventually, they'll realize she's too simple to manipulate anyone. She'll be released. Eventually could be weeks, months. Sigrid's voice hardened. "You're sacrificing her. I'm giving Leif a target that isn't us. Isn't you?" Astrid met Sigrid's gaze, refusing to look away from the accusation there. "This is the cost of survival. Kari suffers temporarily, or we both die. Choose." The silence stretched between them, thick with moral weight. Outside, a rooster crowed, announcing the day whether they were ready or not. "I hate this," Sigrid whispered finally. "I hate what we're becoming. We're becoming survivors. That's all." But Astrid's words tasted like ash. The next 3 days passed in careful performance. Sigrid spoke to Kari twice, asking elaborate questions about horse behavior and weather patterns. Loud conversations, easy to overhear. Astrid watched from a distance as Leif noticed, as his attention shifted, as he began following Carrie instead of her. Guilt gnawed at Astrid's insides. Carrie was innocent, a quiet girl who loved horses and hurt no one, and Astrid was painting a target on her back. But there was no other way. No other way to survive. On the third evening, Sigrid made her suggestion. Halvard, the southern farmers have had good harvests. Perhaps we should increase their tribute before spring planting season. Strike while they have surplus. Halvard, already in a foul mood from his hangover, latched onto the idea immediately. Yes, they've grown fat and comfortable. Time to remind them who their Jarl is. Astrid watched Leif's face light with triumph. He'd heard Sigrid talking to Kari. Now here was bad. Advice. Advice that would anger farmers and create unrest. In his mind, the pieces were connecting. That night, Leif went to Jarl Orm. Astrid learned this from another thrall who'd overheard their conversation. He's convinced the stable girl is manipulating Lady Sigrid, the thrall whispered. Said he'll prove it within days. The trap was set. Now they had to wait for it to spring. 4 days later, Kari was dragged before Halvard in the Great Hall. Leif stood beside Orm, both of them radiating satisfaction. This thrall has been filling your wife's head with ideas, Leif announced. I've witnessed multiple conversations between them, and each time they speak, Lady Sigrid makes suggestions. Bad suggestions that serve no one's interests. Halvard looked confused. Kari, the horse girl? Test her, Orm suggested smoothly. Ask her about politics, about trade. If she's innocent, she'll know nothing. Kari stood trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She was small, younger than Astrid by perhaps 2 years, and completely bewildered. Girl, Halvard barked. What do you know about Southern farmers' tribute? Nothing, my lord. Kari's voice was barely audible. I work with horses. Did you tell my wife to increase their tribute? I don't understand, my lord. I only spoke to Lady Sigrid about whether horses sense storms coming. She asked about animal behavior. Halvard turned to Leif, irritation creasing his face. This girl is simple. She doesn't know anything. She's pretending, Leif insisted, but doubt crept into his voice. They questioned Kari for an hour, asked her about trade routes, about alliances, about politics. She answered honestly, confusion and fear making her responses painfully genuine. She knew nothing, understood nothing beyond horses and hay and the simple rhythms of stable work. Finally, even Orm had to admit the truth. This isn't our manipulator. She's too ignorant. Kari was released, sent back to the stables with warnings to stay away from Lady Sigrid. She fled the hall sobbing, shoulders shaking with relief and residual terror. Astrid watched from the shadows, her stomach churning with guilt and triumph mixed into something poisonous. She'd done this, used an innocent person as a shield, won by sacrificing someone weaker. Later she found Kari in the stables, pressed against a horse's flank, still crying. I'm sorry, Astrid whispered, though Kari didn't know what she was apologizing for. Why did they think I'd done something? Kari's voice broke. I never hurt anyone. I just take care of the horses. I know. Astrid pressed Bjorn's pouch of coins into Kari's hands. Take this. Hide it. When spring comes, buy your freedom if you can. Get away from here. I don't understand. You don't need to. Astrid turned away before the tears could come. Just survive. That's all any of us can do. She left Kari there, confused and richer, traumatized but alive, and Astrid walked back to the longhouse knowing she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd protected herself and Sigrid, but the cost was another person's suffering, another innocent used as a tool. The invisible threads she wove were stained now, not with honor, with necessary cruelty, and she had no idea how many more compromises she'd have to make before this was over. Spring came with blood on its hands. The southern farmers rebelled exactly as Astrid had known they would. Halvard's increased tribute demands, the suggestion Sigrid had made deliberately to mislead Leif, had pushed desperate men past endurance. 3 farmers were dead. 2 of Halvard's tribute collectors were missing. presumably killed and buried in unmarked graves. And now Halvard wanted war. Astrid knelt in Sigrid's chamber, her hands shaking as she picked at embroidery she couldn't see through the blur of guilt. "This is my fault. I told you to make that suggestion. Those farmers died because of me. They died because of Halvard's greed," Sigrid said, but her voice was hollow. She sat by the window, staring at nothing. "You created a distraction to save us. He chose to act on it. I knew he would act on it. I counted on his worst impulses." Astrid's needle stabbed through fabric, through skin. She watched blood well up on her finger, bright and accusatory. "I'm no different than him now, using people, causing suffering for my own survival." "Stop." Sigrid's voice cracked like a whip. "You want to drown in guilt? Fine. Do it after we prevent the war Halvard is planning. Right now, I need you." The words were harsh, but Astrid heard the desperation underneath. Sigrid was barely holding together herself. The weight of their deception, the consequences of their manipulations, was crushing them both. A soft knock interrupted them. Bjorn entered without waiting for permission, his face grim. "Halvard is calling a war council. He wants to march on the southern farms with 40 warriors. Burn them out. Make an example. 40. "Warriors is our entire fighting force," Astrid said, her mind already calculating disasters. "If he commits everyone to punishing farmers, we're defenseless. Any rival Jarl could strike while we're exposed," Bjorn finished. "Yes, and Jarl Orm has been watching our movements very carefully. His ships have been spotted near our waters multiple times in the past week." Sigrid stood abruptly. "I have to stop this. I have to make Halvard see reason." "You can't." Bjorn's voice was flat. "Not directly. Leif is still suspicious even after the Kari incident. If you oppose Halvard now, if you show too much strategic thinking, Leif will start investigating again. And this time, he won't stop at stable thralls." "Then what do we do?" Sigrid's composure finally cracked. "Let Halvard destroy everything? Let him march our warriors to their deaths while enemies circle?" Astrid closed her eyes, thinking. There had to be a way, a path through this that didn't end in bloodshed and ruin. But every solution she could see required Sigrid to reveal knowledge she shouldn't possess, unless someone else made the argument. "Bjorn," Astrid said slowly, "you're a skald. You witnessed Jarl Gunnar's strategies for years. It wouldn't be unusual for you to speak at the War Council, to offer historical perspective. I'm a storyteller, not a military advisor. Halvard barely tolerates me at feasts." Bjorn shook his head. "He won't listen. He will if you frame it as saga, as honor." Astrid stood, her mind racing now. Vikings value glory and reputation above all. Tell him that Gunnar would never have wasted warriors on farmers. Tell the story of Jarls who were remembered as great because they were strategic, not just brutal. Make cowardice sound like wisdom. Make restraint sound like strength. Bjorn studied her for a long moment. "You're asking me to risk Halvard's anger, to potentially expose myself as an obstacle to his will. I'm asking you to save lives, including your own." Astrid met his gaze. "Because if Halvard marches south with all our warriors, and Orm attacks while he's gone, everyone in this settlement dies, including skalds who know inconvenient truths about invisible thralls." The threat hung unspoken but clear. They were all entangled now, all dependent on each other's survival. "Damn you," Bjorn muttered, but he was already moving toward the door. "I'll speak at the council, but if this fails, we all run. Tonight. No more clever plans. Just survival." He left, and Astrid and Sigrid waited in agonizing silence. Below, in the great hall, voices rose in argument. Astrid pressed her ear to the floor, straining to hear. Halvard's voice, loud and aggressive. "The farmers must learn their place. We show mercy. We show weakness." Then Bjorn, his skald's training making his words carry. "May I speak, my lord? I knew your father well. Fought beside him in 3 raids. I remember the saga of Jarl Eriksson. who burned his farmers' fields in rage. Do you know what became of him? A pause. Halvard's grudging response. Tell your story, Skald. Eriksson burned his farmers, killed their children, made himself feared. But fear without loyalty is brittle as ice in spring sun. When enemies came, his farmers didn't defend their Jarl. They opened their gates and welcomed the invaders. Eriksson died alone, betrayed by the very people he'd terrorized. His name is remembered, yes, but as a cautionary tale, not a triumph. You're saying I should let rebellion go? Unpunished? I'm saying there are ways to punish that don't destroy the foundation of your power. Your father understood this. He was brutal when necessary, but never wasteful. Bjorn's voice grew stronger, more commanding. Right now, Jarl Orm circles these waters like a shark scenting blood. Our scouts have reported his ships twice in 8 days. If you march south with all our warriors, you leave this settlement naked. Is punishing farmers worth losing everything? Silence. Astrid held her breath, waiting. What would you have me do? Halvard's voice was sullen but uncertain. Let them mock me. Send 10 warriors, enough to make a show of force. Burn one farm as example, but offer terms to the others. Reduce the tribute back to previous levels. They'll accept, grateful to escape worse punishment. You'll seem merciful and strong, not desperate and reckless. And you'll keep 30 warriors here to defend against Orm if he tests us. More silence. Astrid's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Fine. Halvard sounded annoyed but convinced. 10 warriors, but the tribute reduction is temporary, 1 season only. Relief flooded through Astrid so intensely she had to sit down. Bjorn had done it. He'd reframed restraint as strategy, made Halvard believe the wisdom was his own. Sigrid was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. We did it. We actually did it. This time. Astrid's voice was hollow. But how many more times, Sigrid? How many more? Disasters can we prevent before we're discovered? Before we fail? As many as we have to. Sigrid wiped her eyes, her jaw setting with determination. Because the alternative is worse. But that night, alone in the cold storage room where she slept among sacks of grain, Astrid allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. This couldn't last. Eventually, their luck would run out. Eventually, someone would connect the threads, and when that happened, all 3 of them would die. The only question was how much good they could do before the inevitable collapse. She thought of Carrie, traumatized and paid off. Of the 3 dead farmers, casualties of her misdirection. Of all the lives saved by her invisible influence. Was the balance worth it? Was power without recognition, victory without credit, influence that required constant sacrifice and moral compromise actually worth the cost? Astrid didn't know anymore. She only knew she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, because stopping meant watching everything burn, and she'd already watched too much fire in her life. So she'd continue weaving her invisible web, thread by careful thread, until either the settlement was saved or she was destroyed. There was no third option left. The truth came out on a morning when the fjord ice was finally breaking. Astrid was carrying water from the well when she heard Sigrid scream. Not pain, terror. The kind that comes from seeing your entire world collapse in a single moment. She dropped the bucket and ran. The great hall was chaos. Halvard stood in the center, his face purple with rage, holding a piece of embroidered cloth. Sigrid knelt before him, her hands raised in supplication, and Leif stood to the side, triumph radiating from every line of his body. Explain this, Halvard roared, shaking the cloth at Sigrid. Explain why my wife's embroidery contains coded messages. Explain why this thrall, he pointed at Astrid who'd frozen in the doorway, has been seen. Studying these patterns. Leif had been watching longer than any of them realized, had finally found real evidence, the embroidery system, the knots Sigrid tied to signal when she needed guidance. He'd decoded it, connected it back to Astrid. My lord, I can explain, Sigrid began. Silence, Halvard backhanded her. Sigrid fell, blood blooming from her split lip. You've been manipulated, used, This slave has been controlling you, feeding you ideas, making a fool of me in front of other jarls. She saved us, Sigrid said through bloody teeth. Every decision she guided me toward saved this settlement. The Torsten alliance would have destroyed us. The war with the farmers would have left us defenseless. She saw what you couldn't. The second blow knocked Sigrid unconscious. Astrid moved without thinking, throwing herself between Halvard and Sigrid's prone body. Stop. Please. She's telling the truth. Halvard grabbed Astrid by the throat, lifting her until her feet left the ground. You dare speak? You, a piece of property, dare to manipulate your betters? Black spots danced across Astrid's vision. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the pressure crushing her windpipe. Put her down. Bjorn's voice cut through the chaos. Halvard, put her down and listen. Why should I listen to anyone? My own household has been conspiring against me. Not against you, for you. Bjorn moved closer, his hands raised peacefully. I've known about this arrangement for months. I've watched Astrid guide Sigrid, watched her save this settlement repeatedly from decisions that would have proven catastrophic. She's been protecting your legacy, not destroying it. Protecting? Halvard laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. He threw Astrid to the floor. She gasped, air rushing back into her lungs in painful gulps. A thrall has no right to protect or guide. A thrall exists to serve. This is treason, manipulation. She dies today. Warriors were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Astrid saw faces she'd saved. Men who would have died in Torsten's doomed alliance. Families who would have starved without her careful management of resources. But none of them spoke. None of them moved to defend her. Why would they? She was nothing. A thrall, property. Kill her if you want, Astrid said hoarsely, pushing herself to sitting. Blood dripped from where her head had struck the floor. But know what you're killing. I'm the reason you have food for winter. The reason you didn't lose half your warriors to Torsten's debts. The reason Jarl Orm didn't attack when you wanted to march south. Every crisis you've survived in the 6 months since your father died. That was me, working through Sigrid because I had no other voice. You had no right to a voice. Halvard snarled. No, I didn't. Astrid met his gaze without flinching. I had no rights at all. But I had knowledge. Wisdom. The ability to see consequences you were blind to. And I used it because watching you destroy everything your father built was worse than the risk of discovery. Noble words from a slave. Leif stepped forward, his smile vicious. But manipulation is manipulation. She should be executed as example. Example of what? The Völva's voice froze everyone. The wise woman stood in the doorway, leaning on her staff, her clouded eyes somehow seeing more than anyone else's. Example of intelligence punished? Of wisdom silenced? Be careful what lessons you teach, Halvard. The gods are watching. The gods? Yes, the gods. The Völva moved into the hall with surprising strength for her age. I knew what this girl was doing. I helped her when I confirmed Sigrid's vision about Torsten. I chose to aid her deception because her wisdom served justice better than your impulses served ambition. The admission sent shock rippling through the gathered crowd. The Völva had participated in the conspiracy. Even she had seen the necessity of Astrid's invisible influence. Halvard looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that he stood alone in his outrage. His wife unconscious at his feet. His Skald defending the thrall, his Völva admitting complicity, and his warriors watching with expressions that ranged from confusion to something that might have been grudging respect. What would you have me do? Halvard's voice was quieter now, dangerous in its control. Reward her treachery? Make a hero of a slave? I would have you see clearly, the Völva said. This girl has been your greatest asset and you never knew it. Kill her, and you kill the only person in this hall who understands what your father understood about leadership. Keep her alive, and perhaps she can continue saving you from yourself. I won't be manipulated anymore. Then make different choices. Astrid pushed herself to standing, swaying slightly. I only had to guide Sigrid because your decisions were disastrous. Become the Jarl your father wanted you to be. And I'll have nothing to correct. The challenge hung in the air. Around them, warriors murmured. Astrid could see the calculation in Halvard's eyes. He could kill her, assert his authority, and lose the respect of everyone who'd just learned she'd been protecting them. Or he could find another solution. "You'll be sold," Halvard said finally. "Tomorrow, to whoever offers the most. I want you gone from this settlement. I want the reminder of my humiliation erased." "No." Sigrid's voice was weak but clear. She'd regained consciousness, was pulling herself upright despite the blood on her face. "If she goes, I go. I'll divorce you before the thing, claim abuse, take my dowry, and return to my father's house. And I'll tell every Jarl within 100 miles how you failed to see the value of the wisest person in your household." The threat was real. Sigrid's father was powerful, influential. A divorce would humiliate Halvard more than any thrall's deception ever could. "You'd choose a slave over your husband." "I'd choose wisdom over pride," Sigrid said. "Something you should learn to do." The standoff lasted an eternity. Then Halvard turned away, his shoulders tight with suppressed rage. "Keep her then. Keep your pet advisor. But mark my words, if I discover one more deception, one more manipulation, you both hang." He stormed from the hall, warriors parting before him like water. Astrid's knees gave out. She collapsed, shaking, barely processing that she was still alive. Bjorn was beside her immediately, helping her sit, checking the wound on her head. "You should have run when I gave you the chance," he murmured. "I know." Astrid looked at Sigrid, who was being helped to her feet by other women. Their eyes met across the hall. Understanding passed between them. They'd survived, barely. But at a cost neither had fully calculated, because now everyone knew. The invisible influence was visible. The power that had protected them was exposed, and exposed power was vulnerable power. "What happens now?" Astrid whispered. "Now?" Bjorn helped her stand. "Now you live with the consequences of being seen. You wanted influence? You have it. But influence without invisibility is just a different kind of cage." He was right. Astrid felt it already. The weight of eyes watching her, the whispers starting as thralls and warriors alike processed what they'd learned. She was no longer invisible, no longer safely ignored. She'd traded one form of powerlessness for another, and she had no idea which would prove more dangerous in the end. But as she watched Sigrid straighten her spine, lift her bloodied chin with dignity, face Halvard's warriors with courage instead of submission, Astrid felt something unexpected. Pride, not in herself, in what they'd built together, in the lives they'd saved, in the truth finally spoken, even if the cost was higher than either of them could have imagined. They'd created space for wisdom in a world that valued only force, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that small revolution, invisible no longer, would ripple outward in ways they couldn't yet see. Or maybe they'd both be dead within a season. Either way, Astrid had learned the most important lesson of all. Power didn't need credit to be real. Victory didn't need applause to matter. And sometimes the bravest thing wasn't staying invisible. It was daring to be seen. Astrid's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. How many brilliant minds have been silenced simply because they existed in the wrong body, the wrong class, the wrong moment in history? She had the wisdom to save an entire settlement, yet the world she lived in valued her less than the furniture she cleaned. And when given the choice between invisible influence and visible powerlessness, she chose something far more dangerous. She chose to matter, even if no one could ever know. What would you have done? Would you have fled to safety when you had the chance, or would you have stayed to save people who saw you as nothing? Would you have sacrificed your invisibility for the chance to finally be seen, knowing it might cost you everything? This story isn't just about Vikings or ancient settlements. It's about every person who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told their voice doesn't matter. It's about the quiet revolutionaries who change the world from the shadows, who choose wisdom over recognition, who understand that real power doesn't need applause to be profound. Astrid, learned that being invisible kept her safe, but being seen made her real. And sometimes, being real, truly, dangerously real, is worth every risk. If this story moved you, if Astrid's journey made you think differently about power, influence, and the cost of being seen, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that the most powerful voices are often the ones we've been taught not to hear. Because every person listening right now has their own invisible power waiting to be discovered. The only question is, will you have the courage to use it?